Equilibrium is the basic idea that no one in the market can be made better off without making someone else worse off. Let's take a fake buyer and seller. Let's say that Harold is our buyer in this situation, and Lisa is our seller. Now, Lisa, our seller, wants to sell her good, let's say, mattresses. Lisa wants to sell her mattresses at the highest price possible. However, Harold wants to purchase that mattress at the lowest price possible. Once they agree on a price that's the highest Lisa can get and the lowest Harold can get, that becomes the equilibrium price. Now, in a real competitive market, it wouldn't be so simple because there would be thousands of people doing transactions all simultaneously. However, this simplified model can definitely get us started on what we're going to be talking about. In this video, we are no longer going to be using the supply curve or the demand curve. We are going to be using the supply and demand curve, which is simply both of those curves plotted on the same graph. Now, when you do this, as you see on your screen, you get this X pattern where the middle point, the section that is matched, is where the buyer is getting his lowest price and the seller is getting her highest price. It's important to remember that you will only achieve equilibrium in a market if you are using a competitive market, like we talked about in the first video of this unit. The competitive market can be compared to the more tourist trap market, where multiple stores right next to each other can charge vastly different prices because consumers don't have the time or the knowledge to comparison shop between the two of them. However, in a competitive market, we assume that the buyers and the sellers do have access to all this information, so they know what everyone else is selling and have no way to undercut the market. The equilibrium price, otherwise known as the market price, isn't always static, however. As we talked about in the last couple videos, the supply curve and the demand curve are always shifting. However, once that shifts, what pushes the market to follow the actual graph? Why does the graph remain an accurate representation of equilibrium price and quantity even after there's that change? Well, think about it this way. If the supply curve were to shift to the right, there would be a surplus because the quantity supplied would be higher than the quantity demanded. So what would happen is that the price of that good would slowly fall. Let's continue using mattresses. The price of those mattresses is going to fall until the quantity demanded matches the quantity supplied. This also would happen if, say, the demand curve shifted to the right and demand increased. Suddenly, the quantity demanded is higher than the quantity supplied, and we have what is known as a shortage. Now, the fact that suppliers would start to fill in with more goods, flood the market with more goods in order to match that while raising prices to match that new demand, will push the market price up to the equilibrium point. Now, we've looked at individual shifts in the graph, but what happens when you have multiple shifts or you have both curves shift? Because oftentimes, one factor in the market won't just affect consumers or won't just affect producers, it'll affect both. Well, what you have to be careful for when you have a double shift is that either your price or your quantity will be indeterminate. A very common question to ask with shifts in the equilibrium graph is what will happen to the price and what will happen to the quantity, which usually is answered with price will increase, price will decrease, quantity will increase, quantity will decrease. However, when you have both shift, that's not always guaranteed. You could have a large supply shift and a small demand shift. And if the demand pushed the graph, and if the demand pushed the price down, the change in the demand pushed the price down, while the change in supply would technically push the price up, those conflicting prices will actually be indeterminate because you don't know how big the shift for each of those goods was. The important thing to remember with the supply and demand is that you should always draw out the graph. At a certain point, you will become accustomed enough with these that you will be able to work your way through it without needing to necessarily jot it down. However, you are definitely not at that point yet, and you should still be writing down all of your graphs. If you write down your graph, the graph will give you the answer, and there is no possible way that you can get it wrong. In our next video, we're going to be looking at what happens when the government tries to control supply and demand with price and quantity controls. See you next time, and as for now, this is Duncan driving off into AP Macarnomics.